Again, thank you to our organizers for inviting me over. As was mentioned earlier, I represent the Shareholders Association of the Philippines, and my name is Ysmael. I'd like to welcome you all, TGFIs. Today, I will tell you about your rights as a shareholder. Perhaps you already know, or you already bought shares of your favorite companies in the stock market, or maybe you are considering starting your own stock portfolio. Or maybe you put money in a friend's, or maybe you are considering starting your own stock portfolio, or maybe you have already put money into your friend's company in exchange for shares or equity, and they gave you shares of stock for your investment. Whether your investment is in a publicly listed company or what we call PLC, or a closed corporation like your friend's business, you are granted a set of rights with your stock holdings. Let's start with the basics. You have a right to own shares and register them in your name. You have a right to share in the profits of a corporation. You have a right to be informed. And of course, you have a right to vote. You are free to buy publicly listed shares trading on the Philippine Stock Exchange by opening an account through an accredited broker. For private corporations, the company may offer you an investment opportunity through the purchase of their shares of stock, and you are entitled to make that choice. With ownership, it is also up to you whether you want to hold on to those shares or dispose of them. If you bought your shares in the stock market, you can likewise sell them in the stock market. You may inherit shares or bequeath them in your will, or you may pledge or encumber your shares, such as when using them as a collateral. Most retail investors own their stocks through an online brokerage account, like with the Call Financial or BDO Nomura or other stockbrokers in the Philippines. These are what you call scriptless shares. The shares of stock are in the name of the brokers, or collectively what will appear as PCD nominee corporation on the list of stockholders. But all rights accrue to you as the beneficial owner of the shares. Like any other property, you can assert your ownership by putting the shares of stock in your name in the form of a stock certificate signed by the president of the company and having them record it in their stock and transfer book. You will have to pay a fee to your broker for the upliftment of your shares. And if you own enough shares, who knows, you might just appear in the list of top 100 shareholders, which is uploaded on their PSE EDGE page. Note that hindi pwedeng i-trade ang certificated shares. But that's okay when you hold on to them long-term or kung plano mong ipamana sa mga anak mo. Like what legendary investor Warren Buffett likes to say, our favorite holding period is forever. If you want to sell certificated shares on the PSE open market, you will have to convert them to scriptless shares by paying what they call lodgement fee through your broker and adding them to your online account. When you hold on to stocks long-term, you can earn from them through dividends. As part owner of the company, your shares entitle you to profits or retained earnings of the company, subject to the declaration of cash dividends by the board of directors of the company. Some publicly listed companies lay out their dividend policy upfront, so you can pick out stocks that generate a healthy dividend income for you. Or when you buy preferred shares, you can expect regular dividend payments. Or sometimes a company may declare stock dividends, where you get additional shares or shares in a related company for free. And that also creates value for your investment portfolio. As in the Freedom of Information Act sa government institutions, you also have a right to complete, accurate, and timely information when it comes to the companies you are invested in. And to be an effective investor, you must keep yourself informed of what's happening with the company. Know when you are putting your money into and stay informed to determine whether you should keep your money invested in a business or not. The law requires companies to maintain business records and all information relating to the company at its principal address, and these include the articles of incorporation and bylaws, the ownership structure of the company, voting rights and list of shareholders, the minutes of the meeting of the board and the resolutions made by the board, of course, the records of business transactions, as well as reports required by the SEC and the PSE, such as audited financial statements, general information sheet, which lists the details of the board of directors and the company holdings. These documents shall be open to inspection by any shareholder. Within reason, of course. It is a formal process and needs to be done by written request. Kailangan reasonable timing and within business hours. And of course, subject to confidentiality. As with any right, you cannot abuse this. Meron pa ring Data Privacy Act that we all need to follow and the Intellectual Property Code that protects personal information as well as trade secrets of the business. When a company you are invested in is not complying with disclosure rules, like not filing the financial statements or not holding the annual stockholders meeting, that might be a red flag. Transparency, as we all know, is important when making financial decisions, and transparency is critical to good governance. Also, integral to good governance is providing a voice to both majority and minority shareholders or owners. And like being a citizen of a democratic country, this is done through a voting process. All shareholders have a right to vote, except when otherwise stated in the articles of incorporation. And typically, preferred shares are the ones denied of voting rights. This is important because the shareholders have the power to elect the members of the board of directors, which sets the strategic direction of the corporation. The directors represent your interests when it comes to deciding how the company is run. Voting is also required to approve material business transactions. So anything major that the board decides on, the shareholders must ratify the approval. The company must get the approval of the majority, which is normally 50% plus 1 of all outstanding shares, or a supermajority vote, which is 2/3 of all outstanding shares, depending on what the law requires on the kind of corporate act to be voted upon. Your voting power is proportional to your ownership. Typically, 1 share equals 1 vote. Actions that would significantly impact business operations or its ownership structure is considered major. And examples of this are as follows. If the company plans to merge or consolidate with another company, that's a major decision. If the company enters a management contract where the company you have shares in will be managed by another company, investment of corporate funds, whether in another company or for any other purpose, as well as the declaration of stock dividends. The Corporation Code also requires approval of shareholders by voting on the following matters: amendment of the Articles of Incorporation, amendment or adoption of new bylaws, delegation of the authority to amend the bylaws to the Board of Directors, fixing the issue price of no par value shares, sale of all or substantially all of the assets of the corporation, creation of bonded indebtedness, voluntary dissolution of the corporation where creditors are affected, and dissolution by shortening of corporate term. As you can see, these are major business decisions that will affect the company significantly. And as shareholders, you have the right to vote on these critical decisions. Some of you may have attended an annual stockholders meeting and experienced the election process in person. The revised corporation code now allows for electronic voting, and companies have created online forms for you to cast your vote. Well, dahil nga may pandemic this year, madaming companies online na din ang nag-hold ng annual meeting. And the vote was done through an online form on the company's website, the investor relations section in particular, or sent to shareholders via email. Even when you own scriptless shares, your broker tells you that there is an upcoming meeting where a vote will be called upon. They either request a proxy form for you or from you, where they will vote on your behalf, or ask you to fill out a ballot for you to vote. It is now easier for you to become an engaged shareholder by participating in the election process and exercise your right to vote. Next is preemptive right. That really means that when a company offers new shares up for sale, kailangan i-offer muna sa current shareholders. In other words, the right of first refusal. If you follow news of companies in Silicon Valley, for example, this typically happens when they do fundraising rounds and offer fresh equity to prospective investors. For example, in a Series C round, they have to open the option to buy shares to Series A and Series B investors first. Pero yung priority na binibigay sa current shareholders is only in proportion to their ownership. If the company is increasing its total outstanding stock by 1,000 shares, and you currently hold 10% shares or interest, your preemptive right allows you to buy only 100 shares or 10% of the new issuance before the rest of the shares are open or offered to the public. There are, however, exceptions to preemptive rights, as when it is deemed or denied or disallowed in the Articles of Incorporation. It also does not extend to shares issued in compliance with laws requiring stock offerings or minimum stock ownership by the public, or when the stock is issued to pay for purchased assets or to settle corporate debt as approved by a supermajority vote. In publicly listed corporations, the exception makes sense, and this is to give them flexibility in issuing new shares after the IPO. Otherwise, publicly listed companies would be constrained to provide all of its stockholders reasonable time to exercise their preemptive right, which may then delay the proposed follow-on offering. Earlier, we talked about matters that require a vote of approval by a majority of the shareholders. With your right to vote and to approve these decisions also comes a right to vote to dissent, which means if you do not agree with the approval of a corporate act, you can exercise your appraisal right and demand payment for your shares. To do this, you have to make a written demand within 30 days of the vote, expressing your dissent. And if the proposed corporate action is implemented, the company must pay you for the fair value of your shares as of the day before the vote. Once submitted, you cannot withdraw your demand unless approved by the corporation, or kung hindi na matuloy yung corporate act that you dissented from. Of course, this all assumes that the company has the funds to pay you. But to keep things simple, if your shares are tradable on the exchange, you can simply sell off your holdings in the open market. All shareholders must be treated equally. Whether you hold 1 million or 1,000 pesos worth of a company stock, you should have just the same access to information and other resources provided by the investee company. Note, though, that different types of shares may have different rights from others. For example, preferred shares typically have some preference over common shares in terms of dividends and/or liquidation. But shares of the same class must be accorded the same rights. And you can refer to your investee company's manual on corporate governance, as well as the SEC's Code of Corporate Governance for publicly listed companies for more information. Likewise, the law prohibits insider trading and abusive actions of controlling shareholders. Just because they are more involved with the operations and have early access to corporate information, they cannot profit from privileged knowledge. There are disclosure rules in place to prevent this, and if they violate this by acting on material information not disclosed to the public, they can be subject to investigation, hefty fines, and even jail time. The Securities Regulation Code, or the SRC, provides safeguards on this. The revised Corporation Code, the Securities Regulation Code, along with the SEC's Code of Corporate Governance and the Mandate and Citizens Charter of the SEC and the PSE, provide the legal and regulatory framework to support a socially conscious, free market that regulates itself, encourages the widest participation of ownership in enterprises, and enhances the democratization of wealth. However, minsan, hindi talaga maiwasan na may mga pasaway. So if you see something, say something. If you are on the receiving end of a misbehaving company or a trading participant, it is your duty to report to the proper authorities. The PSE oversees listed companies as well as trading participants, the brokerages that hold your account, and the agents who trade on behalf of their clients. But being a listed company itself, the PSE put up an independent company called the Capital Markets Integrity Corporation. In general, the SEC oversees all corporations, whether public or private, and they have groups dedicated for market and securities regulation, as well as enforcement and investor protection. Their contact details are on the respective websites if you need to file a complaint or any questions specific to their agency. We will also include their contact details on the notes of this presentation. It is reasonable to expect that if the regulators are functioning as they should, then in compliance, the companies you invest in are also working as they should. Every investor has the right to expect the board, management, brokers, and agents to perform their duties and responsibilities in accordance with a corporate culture of integrity, honesty, and compliance with the spirit as well as the letter of the law. The corporate governance framework should protect and facilitate the exercise of shareholders' rights. Currently, the SEC's Code of Corporate Governance enforces the comply or explain rule, where PLCs must abide by the principles set forth in the Code of Corporate Governance or otherwise rationalize or explain why they do not have it in place. SharePHIL actually helped the SEC craft the Code of Corporate Governance, and we made sure that there are guidelines in place to protect minority shareholders, as well as encourage their participation in the governance process. SharePHIL was founded by fellow advocates of good governance to fill a gap in the private sector for an organization to promote minority shareholder rights. Over the years, we have grown that mission to also support financial literacy and investor education, because Filipino investors are still a very small percentage of our population, and there's still a lot of work to be done to encourage more Filipinos to start investing. Our purpose, as you may have read in my virtual background, is to enable Filipinos to invest wisely, achieve financial security, and contribute to the socio-economic growth of the country. We believe that if more Filipinos invest long-term for their retirement and become more actively involved as shareholders, it promotes a more dynamic capital market with more responsible participants on both sides, whether investors or issuers. And if we can significantly increase the retail investor base, it may encourage more companies to list on the PSE as well, and it creates definitely a cycle of growth and may even attract more foreign investments, which then leads to economic growth. Our mission aligns with goals 8 and 10 of the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals that encompasses all stakeholders to promote decent work and economic growth and reduced inequalities by encouraging long-term investing for personal financial stability and being actively engaged shareholders who advocate for good corporate governance. We hope to achieve this through the 3 strategic pillars of educate, equip, and empower for the enablement of investors by providing knowledge, resources, and a solid foundation for good investing habits, and help ensure that the system works by continuously working with regulators for policy reforms that benefit retail investors. So if you want to know more about SharePHIL and the work that we do, check us out online. Visit our website, sharephil.org, or learn more about us, and more importantly, become a member. Join our Facebook page, follow us on Twitter, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We will be coming out with investor education programs and downloadable resources for you. We will also upload this presentation with notes and additional information to our website. And that ends my presentation, ladies and gentlemen. And if you have any questions about SharePHIL, you may email us at secretariat@sharephil.org. Again, thank you, and may you have a fruitful investment journey.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jaime Ysmael, the president of SharePHIL. Okay, and now we're now going to have our question and answer portion. And Mr. Jaime, let me throw in our first question. How does corporations act to protect shareholder class rights from variation?
Well, corporations are subject to all the supervision of the SEC, the PSC, and a lot of government entities. And as a listed company, they're also encouraged to adhere to high standards of corporate governance. And part of that, those standards, is to ensure that shareholders are afforded the rights that they deserve and are protected from all of the differences in the treatments, in share variations. So it's really incumbent on the companies that are listed to ensure that the shareholders' rights are protected by making sure that the class of shares that they issue are accorded with the respective rights, and that the shareholders can exercise those rights. And if they are not able to do so, they can seek redress from the company itself. If failing which, they can actually go to the government agencies that are supervising these companies for basically remedies.
Okay, thank you for that, Sir Jaime. Here's another question. were there any pre-IPO shareholders not restricted from selling stock rights after IPO? What are the other restrictions?
Well, pre-IPO normally, the pre-IPO shareholders normally these are the either the existing shareholders, strategic investors who are already there prior to the IPO, primarily because they lend significant credibility to the company. No, these are normally the some good names, no, that are there before, and once the company actually is listed, does the IPO. Of course, the existing shareholders normally have a window within which they cannot trade, and that is really to protect the existing shareholders, the new ones, no, who are subscribing to the IPO, from any dumping, no, by the shareholders, pre-IPO investors, no, to ensure that the stock price actually is stabilized before they can actually trade. And normally, if I remember it right, it depends. I think normally it's about a 6-month window within which they are not allowed to trade, you know? And that is really to protect the new shareholders from any fluctuations in market price.
Okay, let me pull up another question, Sir Jimmy. How do the actions of the shareholders of a limited company affect the market value of bonds? How do the actions of the shareholders of a limited company affect the market value of bonds?
The shareholders, actually, it's the management of the company that actually is influences to a greater extent the I guess the value of the company, and eventually it may affect the value of the bonds. Well, although as we all know, bonds are different investment instruments, no? And these are subjected to a lot of I guess factors that determine the actual value of the bonds, you know, from the macroeconomic situation, the interest rate environment, but company developments might also affect the valuation of the bonds should there be any major issues affecting the company. And this could be due to the acts of management or even the acts of investors or shareholders. No? Like if there are, I guess, certain corporate disputes and there are a lot of extraneous factors or disputes by the shareholders that may affect the reputation of the company, that will eventually reflect on the credit rating of the company, that may eventually affect the price of the bonds that are listed in the bond markets. You know? So a lot of different factors could affect the value of bonds, from extraneous factors that are outside of the company to internal factors that are happening within the company, including the acts of, I guess, shareholders, you know, to a certain extent.
Sir Jimmy, now last two questions for you. Does a shareholder have the right to compete in a company in which
Technically, we've seen competitors actually invested in the stocks of companies that they are competing with. You know? So there is no restriction on investors investing in any company, and this applies to companies, institutional investors who may have shares in a competing company. But that creates, as we've seen in the past, some sensitivities, and in fact, it could lead to other things, no? Including takeover, the risk of takeover. And we've seen in some Philippine examples that there were situations like that for listed companies where some of the investee companies, the major institutional investors, are really their competitors. No? In those cases, so that can happen. So it's up to the board and the management of the company on how to deal with that. Normally, there's a lot of complications that could happen, especially if it's a hostile investment. and well, technically there are no restrictions on competitor or cross-competitor ownership, but it's something that the company itself, the investee company, will have to deal with on its own. Well, especially the majority shareholders of that company, if they feel that that threat is imminent. There's a lot of things that can happen. So it's hard to comment on that, but definitely there's no restriction on ownership by competitors of a competing listed firm.
Thank you, Sir Jimmy, for that insight. Now, for the last question, what are the advocacies of SharePHIL that can contribute to the socio-economic growth of the country? How about the ongoing pandemic situation and victims of the Typhoon Ulysses?
Since the pandemic started, or even before that, SharePHIL has always been conducting a lot of conferences, from members' meetings where we discuss, I guess, in the topics of interest to the investment community, those that will affect shareholder interest or the business in general. We also hold summits, annual summits, where we tackle specific topics involving big companies that we've done in the past. Were listed companies that we invited, topics such as how to create value in a sustainable manner, father and the legacy of family listed companies transferring to the new generation, or new companies that went IPO and lessons learned. So a lot of summits that we've done in the past that dealt with listed firms as a way to educate the public on how these companies have pursued their journey. Aside from that, we also, and during the pandemic, we did a lot of those summits tackling primarily the recovery acts, from Bayanihan to Heal Act, Bayanihan to Recover Act, and looking at what the government and the private sector can do to actually accelerate the pace of economic recovery. And on top of that, we also attend shareholders meetings of the listed companies. We actually invest in some of the listed companies and try to attend the shareholders meeting to ensure that we participate, and we also point out actively to these companies, to their boards, if they are not complying or there are certain improvements in the way the shareholders meeting should be conducted. We actually come up with actual letters or position papers that we submit to them as well as to the SEC. Again, to ensure that the level of shareholder engagement is at a higher level, and to ensure that everybody is afforded the right to actually vote and given the right information. And moving forward, we're also looking at expanding our reach to cover the larger investment community, especially as we recently redefined our mission, which is really aligned towards promoting more investments in the Philippine capital markets towards inclusive growth by enabling, equipping, and empowering. We intend to launch more investor education programs to actually provide all of these potential investors, especially the retail investors, the opportunity to understand how investing in shares of listed companies will actually enable them to create wealth and therefore contribute to economic development. So this new mandate of actually going after the broader market is something that we will be pursuing, not just by ourselves, but hopefully in partnership with other institutions, like our sessions during the last 2 days. We believe that this is the way to go. And as we mentioned earlier, we subscribe to the Sustainable Development Goals, 2 of them of the United Nations. So we intend to refocus our attention to actually reach the broader investors and educate them and promote more investments into the Philippine stock market.
And that completes our question and answer portion, Sir Jimmy. Are there any final message or parting words before we end our discussion?
Thank you. So again, I would like to invite our listeners to actually join SharePHIL. It's actually an organization that where we believe you can actually get a lot of information on how investing can actually create value for your company, for yourselves, your family. We also need advocates to ensure that investing in the Philippines remains to be hopefully remains to be quite attractive and safe for investors. Basically, we want to spread the news, no, that we are here to actually help promote investing in the Philippines. So we welcome members to join us, and we also invite you to attend all of our webinars and seminars, visit our social media pages so that you will know more about the company. There are various ways of becoming a member. In fact, we also are extending the membership, our reach even to the students that early. Would like them to already start their investment journey. And by joining SharePHIL, by joining the activities that we have, we hope to promote informed investing in the Philippine context. So again, thank you all, and we invite you to join us and as well as our various seminars. Thank you.
Again, maraming salamat, Mr. Jaime Ysmael, the president of SharePHIL, for joining us today on our day 2 of the Bonds and Stocks online conference brought to us by the Global Filipino Investors.